Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. This is Kyle from Read by Kyle. I'm joined here with Benghis Kahn over there from Books with Benghis Kahn. I'll let him introduce himself in just a second, but if you don't know what's going on here or why we're choosing to have this live discussion, Ben and I both have read Brian Staveley before, and I'll let him talk about which he's read and what his thoughts were. And we had a bit of a mixed reception on Brian Staveley, but before we decided we had a mixed experience on Mr. Staveley. We had already both bought The Empire's Ruin because it was really well hyped. And so now that we both own the book, we're like, well, we need to read this book. We might as well do it together. And I came up with the idea that we don't tell each other anything of what we thought, so we get like completely isolated thoughts, and then we can hash it out and discuss it together. So Ben, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about your Brian Staveley experience?
Oh, sure. I'm Ben, and I was hyped for Brian Staveley because I've been following Petrick on Goodreads forever. And I had seen when he did a rave review of Skullsworn, the prequel novella or novel, and then just a rave review of Empire's Ruin. And I was like, okay, he liked the original trilogy, but he said this is a huge level up. Seemed like a tour author and adult epic fantasy, like right up my alley. And so I was very hyped for when Alan at the Library of Alexandria is having his big channel read along. I'm like, oh, finally, I'll jump on the Staveley train. And I read the first book, what was that, The Emperor's Blades, before most of the people on the read along. And it was actually somewhat positive on the read along at first.
Yeah, real quick. I was in this read along too, and I vividly remember like Benghis being one of the first people to comment, and his kind of like enthusiasm and then steady decline over the course.
No, I was game for it. I give authors leeway, especially when I'm a new author. It's a book one and a debut book. I like to give a lot of leeway. And so I was not turned off by book one. I gave it 3 stars in the end, but I didn't have a very negative experience with it. And later on, just more people were piling on in the read along. And then people, I think, were poisoned going into the read and had a negative time with it just from the beginning. And I wanted to just keep it going, though, and see how the trilogy was going to play out. So I then just binged the trilogy. I read Providence of Fire and The Last Mortal Bond. And all 3 books ended up being just mediocre 3-star reads for me, where I was engaged most of the time, but they just didn't do, what those better reads usually do for me and get my investment up. And so I was still having a middling experience, but Petrick raves about Skullsworn and Empire's Ruin. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep it going. Maybe he'll improve after this initial trilogy. And then I read Skullsworn soon after the trilogy. And I thought it was one of the worst reads of my entire life. Just absolutely horrific on every level. And it was really made me never want to pick up another Staveley book again. But I already had The Empire's Ruin. So we're like, let's give it a go and see if he turns it around.
We're fools.
But
Petrick's hype.
Yeah, I saw Staveley being interviewed by Brian McClellan's podcast, and then on the Under the Radar SFF podcast we both listened to recently. And he's like a really cool guy. I think I come from a cool teaching background. I'm a tutor right now and trained to be a teacher. And he was a classics teacher for a while, and then became an author. And he loves the outdoors. And I went to college up in New Hampshire. I feel like pretty connected to Staveley the person, but. Well, I won't say how I felt about this one, but I have found with certain authors that I'm more hyped for them as people than their actual writing sometimes. But yeah, so that was my experience heading into The Empire's Ruin.
Yeah, that's pretty similar to mine, except you trudged through that whole trilogy. I see the comments; people are antsy for us to get to it, but just quickly, because some people will be watching this without context. Same thing as Ben. Alan started the read along. I'd heard great things from Petrick. I started the first book, and I did give it some leeway. Like, I think I have soured on it more and more over time. I gave it 3 stars initially. My main issues were just like it just did a lot of like convoluted stuff, and like the book didn't start to like 70% of the way through the book. I felt those were like my main issues, but it was just like fine. But then the reception for the next books weren't great either. So I was like, well, I'll just try Skullsworn. And then also you had hated Skullsworn. You absolutely just despised it. And I went into reading Skullsworn being like, I'm going to, like, it can't be this bad. I'm going to tell Benghis that he absolutely is just being dramatic. And I kept that a secret, and I read it, and I was just hating it, like literally despising it, and I couldn't tell anybody about it. And then when I finished it, I went on Discord, and I just like had like a 25-minute rant, like just let out all my hatred onto
I
the
loved
world.
it. I loved it. It was
And
cathartic. Yeah.
and I, to this day, I put the most amount of effort and time into that review. Like I really I don't really like rant reviews generally, but I think I'm normally pretty positive, so that's why I made the exception. Is like I'm like, listen, I really hated this. I need to get it out of my system. But
And
yeah,
his
so I was like,
the recent podcast shed some light on that project where he was trying to inhabit the mindset of someone in this death cult and who was bought into the philosophy and beliefs, and he just was not able to make that compelling or seem believable in any way,
oh
and it
man,
just came off
it was the
as
worst, just
like
like the philosophical nonsense.
14-year-old teenage goth philosophizing with their goth
Absolutely.
buddies. Like it was so bad.
It's actually so bad that like, you know, like Game of Thrones, when they say like, what do you say to the god of death? Not today. I like recoil now. Like it ruined that phrase to me. I'm like, not the god of death. So, you know, that book was a traumatic experience for me.
But it could have all
Anyway,
turned around with Empire's Ruin. Yeah.
it could have. Well, I guess we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so I want to guess what your thoughts are, like what star rating you gave it. Oh, I didn't take a single note. I'm just gonna go off memory. I think I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess what you thought, and then you can guess what I thought, and then I'll let you go first, and you can tell me. Like, we're gonna start with non-spoilers, everybody. So, like, if people just want to know what we generally thought of it, Benghis can talk about like generally what he did or didn't like, and like his star rating, and then I'll do the same, and then we'll dive into spoilers if anybody doesn't care or has already read the book. So, I think you have the worst poker face known to man. I think you are legitimately the worst. So I'm going to guess that you gave this book 2 stars because you have just been complaining on Discord for weeks. And it's not about Empire's Ruin, but you've been complaining about Empire's Ruin adjacent stuff. Like you just can't, you're getting your digs in. You're just being like, oh man, young female protagonists with issues. Oh man, I'm so happy to be dealing with an author that has some subtlety finally. So I think you hated it. So, but I don't think you hated it as much as Skullsworn because that was a Pitts experience. So I'm guessing 2 stars.
I am guessing for you that you gave it 2.5 stars.
Okay.
And that it was a net negative read for you, but that you didn't hate it, and it was more similar to the Emperor's Blades than Skullsworn for you. Right, that's
okay,
what I'm. I have had no inklings from you. I think
I think
been solid.
I think I have been. I've been pretty decent with it. I've been specifically trying to not say anything about it that could be perceived as positive or negative, except the one time on Discord I kind of trolled a little bit. I was like, "There's only 200 pages left." But I was like, "That's factually accurate." So,
all right. So my guess is 2.5 stars.
okay.
All right. So your guess is actually off. I think I actually did a good job with my poker face to an extent. I gave this one 3 stars.
Okay,
right down the middle, in line
a mid experience.
Yes,
the Empire's mid.
Yeah, exactly the same feelings and experience that I had with all 3 of the Chronicle of the Unhewn Throne books, where I was engaged for most of it, but my investment in the story is just hanging by the slightest thread, and I feel like it could be cut at any moment. But it still held on. I was still engaged with all 3 of the plot lines, and for some reason caring what was happening in this larger world. And I didn't have that bad of a time with it, but I was sometimes not always immersed. Like some of the things he does in his prose with just endless metaphors, like he fits more metaphors per square inch than any other fantasy reader I've ever read, a fantasy writer. Just like, and he comes from a poetry writing background.
For sure. I'm gonna stop you real quick.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. In that podcast, when he's like, "Yeah, I used to write poetry," I'm like, "It all makes sense."
Yes,
it all makes sense.
So like some of the prose things, and there's repetitions of certain words. A lot of these markers are just for one word that got repeated a million times. And so there are some prose things he does which take me out of the story, and I just like being fully immersed basically all the time. I don't enjoy reading poetry in my free time, I just like to be in it with the story, the setting, the characters. And so there were things like that, and certain plot holes. He, I think, more than most modern fantasy authors, just does not put the work in to ensure that all the plotting makes sense, and that he's avoiding like obvious plot holes. And I don't think he has the greatest editing team at Tor, and just certain plot holes just take me
Tor
out of it.
taking strays.
So, like, there are certain things that bothered me, and I just and I like faster paced books and with intricate plotting, suspense plotting. He's never delivered that in any of the books I've read. And they're more these slower paced character studies. And it was okay. I was into all the main characters, honestly, and caring about them. But like I said, just barely. And so 3 stars for me.
Okay, fair enough. I have to respond to Jay first of all. Thank you, Jay. But second of all, you did not watch my Skullsworn rant then, because there's no nuance. I just hated that book. But thank you. Okay, so I loved this book. I gave it 4.5.
What? Wow.
I enjoyed it a lot. Not only did I give it 4.5, if this was my first Staveley book, I would have given it, I think, a 10 out of 10. I really think I did.
Wow.
Most of my problems came from the fact that I hated every other thing he's ever. So like the recurring things that he did, like I think he's just the pits at religion. Like literally just never talk about religion ever again. He's so not good at it. He's like a 10-year-old. So everything to do with like, instead of the goddess of death, it's the goddess of love in this book. Like I just was like, literally shut up. And there was like 2 or 3 moments where I did like, he almost had like the breadcrumbs of a great like philosophical idea there, and it just didn't work out for him.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like I like Ruck's storyline, and I like it was just so much like Spartacus, which is one of my favorite series and like people of all time. And then like Gwenna's storyline, I just loved Gwenna. I loved how like weird, like just like it just felt like that movie King Kong where they go and they try and capture King Kong, but then there's all these like bugs and shit trying to kill him. I was just super into it. All the weird animals. I did call some of the twists. If I had I have nitpicks for this book, but I was enjoying it a lot, and so I let a lot of the nitpicks go away. Anitha, I didn't actually finish this question. I never finished the first trilogy because I hated Skullsworn so much, but I had already owned The Empire's Ruin, but I didn't own the next 2 in the trilogy. So I was like, if I like The Empire's Ruin enough, I will go back and finish the first trilogy. But even the author said that it's like start of a new thing, and I think I agree with him, although I'm sure that we will talk about that. But
wow, I'm so happy that one of us really loved it.
Like, yeah, I thought it was really good.
I'm glad we have some things to chat about. We have some differences of opinion, but I wish I had like a 10 out of 10 experience with it. It's a tome, and these are thin pages. It's like the Stormlight style printing, and this is a long, deliberately paced book. And yeah, I think I am going to continue though, because I've already invested in 5 books into the world, and so I'm hoping that it will have some catharsis and payoff in the end. But I also, having gone through the first trilogy with so little catharsis, and where the overarching plotting didn't feel very satisfying or suspenseful or go many places, I don't have much faith that this is going to go to an interesting place. So it is really a setup book, and without that, I think that also hurt my enjoyment of this one, feeling like oh, this is just so much setup for things he's probably not going to be able to pay off. But we shall see. We shall see.
We'll see. I think because I've had such like middling to negative experiences with before, if the next book comes out and I don't like it, I do think I will jump ship. But this one really worked for me. I really liked Gwenna's. So I'm going to answer Bridget real quick. She says, I own this one. It's okay to read it without going back to finish the first trilogy. I'll get Ben's opinion, but he has read the whole first trilogy. But this book, it follows a character. Well, it follows 2 characters that are in the first series, but one I don't think really matters. And then the other one is like kind of a major supporting character in the original trilogy, but was she in the first book? Was Gwenna in the first book? I don't think she was.
First one, maybe not, but she actually became a fairly, like, the 4th main character in the trilogy, like maybe
Yeah,
in book 2. Yeah.
that's what I thought too. So I kind of agree with Esme here. I would have already had more investment in like her character to start with if I had finished the trilogy, but I do know that I wasn't enjoying the main trilogy, so I might have just hated the fact that it was reminding me, because the things I didn't like about this book the most is how much I hated Skullsworn and the things that reminded me of Skullsworn. Like everything to do with the three, I was just like, stop reminding me of this bad book. So I would like it's a new story. There's only like 3
Yeah.
characters that are in the original trilogy, I think, and they're like given enough context that you don't need to like know what happens at the end of the. It
Oh
will
yeah.
spoil
Yeah.
the first trilogy for you though, but if you don't care about that,
Oh my god, the end of the first trilogy is so anticlimactic. It's better to skip it, honestly. If just the end of book 3, just you don't need to know the details of what happened there. So you can totally skip the whole first trilogy. You can skip the second 2 books of the first trilogy. You'll be completely fine.
you can
You
super
will,
skip
yeah.
Skullsworn. Actually,
Yes.
actually, so here's the thing. Removing myself from my hatred of Skullsworn, it does give background on a character in this book that I think would be helpful. Like, I don't think you would be losing out if you didn't have it, but it did like inform some of the backstory for this character.
Yeah.
But because I hated Skullsworn so much, I just didn't want to be reminded of that plot line. So,
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm not a good person to recommend whether or not you should read Skullsworn, but I do think it is easily skippable if you don't want to deal with that. And
Yeah,
yes, I had
definitely.
a vague. I think she shows up right near the end of the first book as one of the Ketrel, but she's just like a minor character kind of. And then in the second book, that's kind of my memory, but it has been a year. Yeah, same thing. Like Alan's read along just tanked this whole thing. Yeah, I loved Gwenna. So this is the main reason I liked the book. I thought Gwenna was really, really good. When Petrick compared this book to The Way of Kings, I was gonna fly to Indonesia and I was gonna fight Petrick. I was like, "There's no way this man." And I get what he means now, totally. When he says it's like Way of Kings, it really is to me. Like I totally understand where that inspiration comes from and why Petrick feels that. And I was thinking that a lot through the book too. It has a lot of similar vibes with Kaladin's arc, which is one of my favorite arcs. Now, it goes without saying to me that I like Brandon Sanderson more than I like Brian Staveley. So I think Kaladin's arc is better. Like it's better done, but it is a similar arc. And I think that exploring depression is something like in a main character that is very hard to do. And I think
Yeah.
he did do a pretty good job with it. What did you think about like Gwenna? I know you kind of got burnt out by the whole feelings thing.
Yeah,
But
although that honestly is more the fault of these other books I read recently. The Space Between Worlds and Rubicon were both so similar, and also had a similar thing going on with the main POV. And so I was a little burnt out on this type of arc. I wasn't really in the mood for it. I do think it was handled well. I just wish that it had felt like what sent her into depression was maybe more earned.
I didn't. This is a main well-known
Staveley,
thing.
Staveley wrote this book, and apparently, like, she wasn't depressed in his first draft of the book.
Yeah.
And people said her arc was flat, and so he went back and basically put in this beginning chapter to set up this new arc for Gwenna. I want to, in the spoiler section, get into all of the problems I had with chapter 1. I was so worried after chapter 1 that this was going to be a 0-star hate read for me. Like that was the worst, one of the worst beginnings to a book I've had in my life, and I was so worried.
I had no feelings on it.
Yeah, thankfully it got back on sure footing after that. But it felt so contrived just to be something extreme to put Gwenna in her depression, and so I was so put off by that how he had done that the beginning of the arc was already started off kind of on the wrong foot for me. But then how it played out and the journey she was on, I think really was done well. I'll agree with Esme when she said that arc was great. Esme, I'm totally with you on that one. It was handled well. It was compelling.
Bye, Esme. See you later. Thanks for popping in.
So yeah, I'm with you on Gwenna being a good character and that arc in this book being handled really well. But just some of the plotting and the side characters in Gwenna's plotline to me did not do enough for me to carry that section. But Gwenna, I could totally see that being similar to the Kaladin arc. But Kaladin's arc, I'm so invested and it feels ultra earned. Like we get so long with Kaladin and then the flashbacks and so much. And even having read more of Gwenna's backstory through the trilogy, I didn't feel connected to her, or that her journey or this arc in particular was earned enough. But yes, maybe even skipping those Gwenna books earlier, where you learn more about her and how she becomes part of this Ketrel team.
I kind of liked having like the
yeah.
mystery of her backstory. Like, I mean, I knew like vaguely what she was talking about, like that she was part of the Ketrel. Clearly, some stuff happened in the original trilogy, but when she would talk about things, I wasn't sure. Like, I just, when people talk about their backstories, that's just backstory. So I'm just like, oh, I don't really need the other context. Like, I get that she's upset about her dad or whatever, and I don't even know if her dad factors into the original trilogy or not. So, I agree with you on some of the side characters. Again, it's really interesting because, I mean, everybody does this, and I'm gonna bug you a little bit. I think you're worse for this, but definitely I do too. Like, everybody does it, which is that if you're on like the teetering of liking or disliking a book, like if you like the book, you're going to forgive a lot more of the issues.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
That's what everybody does. Right.
Yeah.
But then if you tip to the not enjoying, all of a sudden you're going to be like, well, this is actually stupid. And I just think you switch this way and this way so fast. You're just like, well, maybe it's good. And then you're like, it's amazing. And then you're like, well, maybe it's bad. And you're like, actually, I hate all of this. And it's like, bro, just like make your meter move slower.
Bye, Anitha.
Bye, Anitha. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're so right, though. And you're right in general that if the whole thing is just kind of working and I'm immersed and I'm just engaged and invested, I will ignore prose things that might otherwise annoy me or take me out. Side characters that don't get a lot of depth to them, maybe I'll just won't mind, or I'll still like them. And so you're all right. If the whole thing is kind of just firing on all cylinders, then I think you do overlook a lot of things that might annoy other readers of the same thing. And then this is such a weird read, though, because I was like right in the middle and was like, am I not liking this? Am I liking it? And it was, these are the weirdest reads, and definitely some of the least common types of reads for me, because I feel like I do usually just either not vibe with a book completely or vibe completely. So reading Staveley is so strange for me, honestly, because it feels like I should be liking them more, and I don't really understand why I'm not as invested as maybe other people.
Let's talk about the prose real quick, and then maybe we can jump into spoilers, because I think Esme was the only one here who had read the book. So I don't think we're protecting from too much. But what I would say about the prose is that I thought it was significantly better than all of his other books. Like, it's not even close. The other books, every time he was trying to be philosophical, it was dumb to me, like 100% of the time. This book still had some times where I was like, I mean, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Or it was like dragging down. It was like a character who wouldn't be philosophical would be philosophical. But the actual prose, or like the things he was saying, like I highlighted a bunch of passages. I thought he leveled up a lot in the prose. What did you think?
I didn't notice necessarily a leveling up or a leveling down in the prose. I don't pay too much attention to prose in general. Like, I try just to let it be the vehicle for the story. But I didn't notice really a big difference, other than, I don't know, I guess there were fewer things than Skullsworn that like noticeably bothered me, and there were long stretches where I didn't notice the prose. So that's a good thing. But there was one word that he repeated about
tell me your word
20 times in the first chapter. And if an author does that with a word that kind of stands out, it's kind of like marked choice, where like the more common or less noticeable word is not used in this place. Like, you notice it, but if it gets repeated a few times, then I actually start to be like, oh no, like, why is he reusing this word so often? And then every other time, because I got to that point in the first chapter, every other time I heard it, I was listening to the audio or reading, I noticed it, and it totally took me out of my reading experience. And that word is blaze. Blaze.
Didn't notice at all.
Every red marker on here is an instance of the word blaze. And so it's not the worst word to use, and in isolation might be great, but how he repeated it so many times in the beginning, and look, most of these are actually in the first third of the book. And so just how many times he could have just used the word fire a few times in its place, and I wouldn't notice a thing. But he loves the sound of the word. I think as this poet, he cares a lot about specific word choices, to the detriment of readers like me who would just prefer to not notice the prose or repeat words. And so like
I think that
I could
bothers most people. Like if you notice a word being repeated, I think it's really bothersome. I usually notice it if it's really close together, not like over the course of a whole thing. So I just went to my Goodreads and I have them hidden so that people couldn't know that I liked the book, but I
Mhm,
did have a bunch of quotes. I just want to read one. It's kind of long, but the reason I'm going to
mhm,
choose this one is because I think it's pretty good and it's an example of something that he was doing throughout the whole trilogy that didn't work for me at all, and I feel like it's the same type of thing, but I actually liked it this time. And it also has no spoilers. So
mhm.
it's the rain, on the other hand, was all too real. The rain had weight, not the individual drops, of course, which splattered harmlessly on the bridges and wooden causeways, drained from the baked clay tiles of the rooftops, stifling Dongbang's 10,000 canals. But the idea of the rain, countless days of it, crouching over the city, pressing down, 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 gently but unrelentingly, with a billion implacable fingers, until even people who had lived their entire lives in the Delta, who had seen 40 or 50 or 70 rainy seasons, began to go about stooped, hunched, as though the weather were a mere weight that they bore on their backs. I think that's very, very immersive and evocative,
That's
and
good, yeah.
it's getting across like the environment that these people have lived in. It's a hard life. It's very rainy. It's like the wet season all the time. But these people have lived and like hunkered in. Like I
Mhm.
feel like that paragraph establishes a lot, and it's also kind of like philosophical. And that's the kind of stuff he was doing in Skull Sworn like 6 times a page, but it was all terrible for me. So that's the kind of thing that
Yeah,
I felt
no,
like leveled up.
I agree though that he does that, and sometimes it does work for me too. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, why couldn't the whole book just be this?
Yeah.
And I have yet to have that kind of Staveley read where it's just every time he's trying things like that, and he's trying to be a little more evocative, that it is really working, and I notice it in like a positive way. But I think you're right. I did also flag a few quotes that I thought were evocative and worthwhile. Let me read one here. I'll try to avoid the beginning with the spoiler part, but the future would still happen. Some future. Locked in an ash tree somewhere was the arrow shaft that would one day orphan a family. A broken plowshare rusting quietly in some Catalan barn would one day be dragged out, hammered into a new shape, polished and sharpened, then driven through a human heart. The next month, next year, next century, it was built already, all of it. The violence that would ruin empires was already stitched into the dark, quiet, unnoticed places of the world.
Yeah, I like
Uh,
that.
Oh, that one was great. I noticed that. I'm like, yeah, Staveley, go. And there was another one not too far. He was on a roll in this bit because it was just 2 pages later where he was doing a metaphor as he is wont to do, and it was really worked for me though. A path unfolded slowly. If you followed a path too far in the wrong direction, all you had to do was turn around, start walking back the other way. What had happened to her felt more like a breakage. The right force had been applied at the right time in the right
Mhm.
way, and something inside her had snapped, something that could not be put back.
I love that. That's one of my quotes
Yeah.
too. I really like that
Ah,
part.
yeah.
So like with Gwenna's depression, I kind of agree with you that I think the impetus for it is very simplistic and like not how like you don't just be like, oh, I failed. I guess I'm super depressed. But I do think like oh, you haven't read this yet. Okay, we're gonna come back to this like later in our lives after you've read A Feast for Crows. There's something
Mm.
called the Broken Man speech in that book, which is my favorite speech in fiction. And I can tell you what the premise is because the premise is
Oh,
it's more
nice.
about how it's told, and it's about how like war really grinds people down until eventually a lot of people snap and then they're broken. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an echo of that idea. Like it's not being told by somebody else, third person, about like what might happen, but it is an example of it. And so Gwenna, yeah, like the first chapter, I don't know if that is exactly what would happen with somebody in that situation where now she just like didn't want to leave her cabin and like was just, but I also think that, I've never been a soldier and, I've never been in horrific traumatic experiences and lost friends and, dealt with all the things that these types of people deal with. And so I do get that, like, sometimes it's just like you're done. Like, there's a snapping point and then you no longer are the person
Yeah.
you were. And I think that he portrayed that with Gwenna pretty realistically from, the vague stuff that I understand about it.
Yeah, no, I think so. But on the other side, though, are the metaphors that just weren't working for me, or the prose things that weren't working. So like he has a habit of being in Gwenna's POV and including these metaphors that apparently Gwenna is thinking of herself. Like it's not the author Staveley, it's Gwenna the character is thinking in these
Yes, I
metaphors
agree.
and commenting on them. So we get early on, it's not his fault that we're in here, it's yours. The words landed, a fist to the face. She would have preferred an actual fist, but the evening didn't seem to be taking stock of her preferences. So this to me is not a believable thought. She's
Yeah,
thinking the words landed like a fist, but she would have preferred an actual fist. That is an example of a prose thing that just takes me immediately out of the story. I don't think it's a believable thought.
That's something that I wouldn't notice, but once you point it out, or if I was forced to think about it, I'd be like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. Let's transition to spoilers because I want to hear the things that didn't work for you more than like vague stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And also, before we get to spoilers, we've been talking only about Gwenna's POVs. There's actually 3 POV characters in this, and we haven't even touched upon one of them yet because it's my biggest problem with the book. The second POV takes up like probably, I would say it's probably Gwen is probably like 40% of the POVs, and then maybe like 25-30% are Ruck, and then just like 10 or 20% is a kill.
Yeah,
and
this is Staveley's MO, doing a 3 POV book just like the Emperor's Blades, and one of those POVs gets barely any page time compared to the others, and so it feels so unbalanced. I think a lot of people complained that Adair got so little page time.
That was interesting in that podcast. He was talking about how originally it was because the book was longer and he had to go out and cut out a bunch of Adair chapters. That was interesting. I don't think that's what he did with this one.
No, I don't think there was stuff that needed to have occurred in Akil's POV that he left out. I think, though, he could have reduced the other POV's plot lines just a little bit, like cut out a chapter here, a chapter there that weren't too important, and then made it feel more balanced. And so we go away from Akil for as long as we did sometimes, because some of the other plot lines just felt a little stretched out.
I don't agree with you because I liked it. Well, okay, actually, I think Ruck's plotline was drawn out.
Once we do spoilers, I'll try to mention.
I was just gonna say, so we're gonna go to spoilers now. So if you haven't read the book, or if you just don't care, you're definitely not gonna read it, and you want to know, like, you want to see Ben rant a little, I guess, or just see us have healthy disagreement, which, not for nothing, there should be more conversations like this on BookTube where people are just disagreeing politely about books, but that's a different discussion.
Amen.
But yeah, so we are going to be transitioning to spoilers where I tell Benghis that he is wrong about everything he's ever thought. So spoilers begin now. What were your biggest issues? Like, what was the thing that like kept grating on you? Was it just the prose? Was it specific plot choices, or what do you think it was?
So this is the thing about a 3-star read is I didn't have huge issues. It was just a bunch of little ones that I think added up to prevent me from being in that fully invested 5-star, even 4-star read type of experience. So like the prose is one of them. Like those little metaphors, like I said, he's just doing metaphors on every page, and even little ones just are constant. He's narrating almost every single emotion that his POV characters are feeling, especially Gwenna. And other fantasy authors like George R. R. Martin, they're not doing that. Like he leaves the audience to infer a lot of the time how they might be feeling. And so Staveley, being the poet background that he comes from, I think he can't even just like say the emotion. He doesn't say like, oh, she felt dread, she felt relief. He has to do a metaphor for every single emotion. And so even little ones like, let's see, Gwenna felt a howl like a spear point lodge in her throat. There's just a million of these, something lodging in her throat, or bile rises in her throat. I think there's about 100 of that in particular, bile rising in the throat, which I don't even think is most of the time a believable physical reaction, and just like being a little bit scared or frightened. Then there's how many stones are lodged in the gut or the throat, about 10 million. And so like that adds up where I'm just like not immersed all the time like I would normally want to be. But I want to get into chapter 1 and my spirit problems with chapter 1 and how that kind of soured me on a lot of got the whole book off on the wrong foot for me. But to go into some of the other POVs, the Ruck POV I enjoyed, and I was listening to a lot of the audiobook for that, and Joe Jameson is the narrator.
Yeah, he's really good. I'm going to go and listen to Trader's Blade soon because I liked him so much.
Yeah. Oh, I'm definitely gonna do that. So I was just really into Ruck's character, and I just loved Bien. His, this really saintly, sweet character, who's thrown into this terrible situation, and she really does maintain like her sweet character, and And so I liked that kind of character setup, and I do like a good gladiator story and Spartacus story, but Staveley didn't do that much with it. Like there
He
was like
didn't, yeah,
there
for
was
sure.
one training scene, and I do like the old grizzled trainer character who has like a soft, sensitive
I
spot for
actually
like
like
his
Goatface
trainees.
quite a bit.
Yeah, I liked Goatface a lot, but Staveley went back to the same well he did in Emperor's Blades with this setup where the whole setup doesn't really make logical sense, where it's like supposedly these prisoners are supposed to be kept safe because they need to be kept safe for the high holy days and the gladiatorial fights, and but apparently they could just get into fights and sexually assaulted whenever, with the guards turning the other way, when they had already said that the guards were making sure that they were kept safe. And so he did the same thing back with the Ketrel trainers, where the Ketrel, when they're being trained in book one, they can just like assault each other. The kids can
That
just like
drove me
assault each
way more
other.
crazy.
And then did we have to get like a sexually sadistic character just like we got in book one of the Emperor's Blades? Did we have to get another version of that to provide some tension and conflict? Like I thought the foils that were set up with the evil other gladiatorial people didn't really land with me. And then when they turned out to have to fight with them at the end, I was just like, they're psychopaths. Like this is not like you shouldn't have made them so psychopathic or sadistic to then make them on the good guys' sides. I just wasn't comfortable with them fighting side by side, and then it seemed like everyone had just forgotten how psychopathic and terrible they were. I don't know, that put me off. Like that whole scene was like a whole chapter where they almost got sexually assaulted by that weird woman. I forget her name. But like that is an example of a rough
Snake
chapter.
Eyes. Snake
Eyes,
Eyes.
yeah.
Snake Eyes.
Like
Snake
we already
something.
got the sense that their group was like dangerous and evil. Like we didn't need that chapter. Like that is a rough chapter that could have just been excised from the book. And then the Gwenna chapters, there were a few Gwenna chapters that I felt also just weren't too necessary. Like they go on this Heart of Darkness journey to this island, and then they succeed in the mission. They get the eggs. They depart on the ship, and just randomly, giant author contrivance, this is the time for a once a year or once every 5-year giant storm that sends them right back to the island, and basically accomplished nothing except to split up the groups so that Jonan was ahead of them and Gwenna was on her own. Like that is another whole chapter that I thought could have been excised, and they could have just found a better way to separate the groups. And yeah, there were a few chapters in the Gwenna adventure that I felt just didn't add much to the plot line. Like some of the empty like ruins they found, like there were just ways I thought could have been condensed, and that could have been cut down. The ruck could have been cut down a bit here and there, and then it would have felt more balanced between the three POVs. That would have, I think, made it a tighter read for me.
Yeah, it's funny. I agree with every single one of your problems. Like your problems are like my biggest problems in the book. Besides that, like my biggest problem in the book is when at the very end, Bien, who I really liked as a character, just decides that like it's just like, oh, I love people. Like, have you seen Doctor Strange, the second Doctor Strange movie?
No.
Oh, they do a similar thing. It just drives. I just cannot believe it. It's like for Bien to just be like, wait, I'm gonna defeat you, crazy beast of lore, because I love these people now. And then I'm just like, this the Teletubbies? Like, what is this?
No,
like,
her being love and her magical superpower being love, like that seemed to literalize like part of her character that didn't need it.
So I didn't mind it at first, except it's a good concept where if her well is an emotion and she's dedicated to this goddess of love, which like, I mean, I didn't like this to begin with, but if that's the idea, and then, she's experiencing a crisis of faith and she is now depressed. Like, I think it ties really well in with Gwenna's arc without being too on the nose about being tied into Gwenna's arc, where she also is feeling depressed and like she never experienced her life to go like this. Now she has to like potentially kill people. The guy she loves found out her dark secret, and now she doesn't know if she can trust him. All of this stuff, and then now her response is that she doesn't know who to love. She's just filled with hate. Mm-hmm. That could be handled very, very well. So when it was revealed that her well was love and she was having trouble thinking, essentially, if you rephrase it, I think a lot of it could be better if it was just rephrased slightly not Teletubbies like. Like if if he had just been that like she was unable to think positively about the situation, and then therefore it wasn't strong enough love, like I think literally that would have made the whole thing work for me, where it's like I still feel love, but like I also feel so much fear about us dying that I can't focus on the love. That would have maybe made it so much better to me. But if she's just like, I can't love, wait, actually I love everybody, and I just, oh, I hated that scene so much. And I also really hated the
Yeah.
three bullies, like like they were
Yeah.
absurd.
Yeah.
The Joe Jameson did an excellent job with like the head bully. Like that was a really good voice. Like I don't I don't know how to explain it, but it was like captivatingly well
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Everything he did was great. Yeah.
But yeah, they were just terrible. And I did like at the very least, and this is me just like even as I was I was listening to the audiobook and I knew I was making excuses because I was like, oh, I just like the books, like whatever. But I was like, at least Ruck is the one in danger of getting sexually assaulted. He's doing something different. Like
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, I thought it was gonna be Bien, and I'm like, oh, you son of a bitch. Like, are you kidding me? But and then I was like, all right, at least we're showing, a little bit of nuance in the but yeah, I think those characters either shouldn't have existed or been like completely rewritten. I think they were terrible.
He was just doing the same exact thing that he did in Emperor's Blaze, and a lot of people just found that insipid in that book, and he just was recycling the exact same kind of character situation with those bullies in the training ground. It's just recycling it just seems really lazy to me.
We're in spoilers, Theo. We don't hate the book. Ben gave the book 3 stars, and I gave it a 4.5. That being said, I actually think you would like this book. Like, not shitting on anything. I actually would wholeheartedly recommend this book to you. But it's your prerogative to believe me or not.
I want to get into one of the other areas that I found issue with, which is that I think Staveley's world building is very superficial, or at least it's not very deep. And I think he almost became a fantasy author because he doesn't want to do much world building work. Like he just throws a bunch of random stuff together. There's not much history that leads into this whole present day timeline. The actual areas of the empire, we almost learn nothing about them. There's just the city of Dambang, which is like a pre-modern Vietnam, and then Anur is like a weird, is like a late Rome almost. I have no clue, but Anur has no identity. This whole empire has no identity. We have no clue if it's doing good things, if it's the evil empire. He does so little with the empire. And so when like Akil's whole arc and plotline hinges on whether he's going to give this black seed to the emperor, Adair, or not, I just don't know if I care one way or the other. It's like, oh, the Nevarim seem really evil and bad. So giving the seed to the one person who might be able to fight against them seems like a good thing. So Akil's like, his arc is now he's starting to care and not be just selfish because he's listening to the dying Cestream woman to say, don't give it to the emperor. But I'm like, but this is misplaced selflessness because he really should give it because they need to fight against the Nevarim. So this is like the overall world building and plotting is there's so little of it. There's so little to latch onto other than the individual POV character arcs. And so like the Anur, I feel like it has no identity as an empire. And then Dambang, what's going on with the thematics around Dambang? So I feel like he's making a kind of anti-colonialist argument and a colonialist argument at the same time with Dambang. It's like Anur basically held dominion over them for a while, and they've been recently overthrown. But that just released the primitive savage beast within Dambang, so they can have their worship of their violent gods and their violent games. And it seems like he was in favor of their freedom and autonomy, seemingly, but then also kind of in favor of the more civilized Anurian empire, like ruling over them. And then we're just these same things are handled in Malazan to just much more sophisticated degree. And so like just having exposure to books like that, and then coming to this where it seems like Staveley doesn't know what he's doing with the themes. It's just kind of random that like and he's doing it just because he not putting in the work to do all the world building. That's definitely taking away from my enjoyment here. But Dambang is a very weird thematic thing that I don't really understand.
This is such a Ben complaint. If I was to pretend I was you, and make a complaint, this would be how I would make a complaint. So I don't really agree with you. Like I do agree with you in the sense that like the actual words you're saying, like I don't think you're like wrong, but I don't agree with maybe the intentions or the effect behind them, which is going to be personal for each reader. But okay, you said a lot of things. Let me back up a little. So I think he's very very good at environment in this book. I don't think he was that good in the other books. Um, I thought that I got the feel that I needed to get for each area that we were visiting. I do agree with you. I don't think we got a lot about the Empire. The difference for me was I don't think it was necessary for this book. I see what you're saying with the seed, but I think actually, if by the second book that wasn't more extrapolated on, I would have a bigger problem. Like just to use a different series without spoilers, the Empire of the Wolf, like the Justice of Kings. I don't think you get very much information about how the world works in the Justice of Kings, right? But you're very clearly focusing on, you know, three characters and some
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
going on, and you're aware other stuff's going on the peripheral. And then, you know, Tyranny of Faith dives into those things, and you get way more about what's going on. So if the sequel to Empire was Ruined also is just kind of hand wavy and like this person's maybe bad, but this person's good, I think I would have significantly more issues with it. We were focusing, like, we weren't really in the Empire. That was the main thing. Akil's storyline doesn't work for me in several ways, but Gwenna is not there at all. And the stuff in Dongbang, like, that's a free city. So I can see, like, that kind of all worked for me. Like, I had kind of the opposite experience as you, where life is complicated. And I
Hmm.
don't think everything that a character says in a book is the way the author feels about something,
Yeah, yeah.
obviously. So I do think that like when a city is, you know, liberated from oppression, or you know, they get taken over, any changing of the guards governmentally and politically, I do think there's going to be a lot of confusion, and there's going to be people who think one thing and then do another thing. There's going to be people who you know, bastardize the philosophy in order to get what they want. There's going to be people that want to go back to the way things were, and then like one character I really liked, we haven't talked about him yet, is I don't know why I'm blanking on him, the other Ketchel. He was maybe my favorite character in that
Talal,
storyline because
Talal,
Talal.
the
Okay,
one,
yeah,
yeah, the one
yeah,
who's with in his prisoner in
yeah.
the Gladiator. Yeah.
I thought he was great, and I think his character is what made all of that kind of click into place for me, because his philosophy, I think, I have no idea, just based on two interviews and just vaguely how the world feels. I think Talal feels more like Brian Staveley's voice in this book
Hmm.
as to what he kind of thinks, because
Yeah.
a lot of times he would be like, well, you know, like people are complicated. And that's kind of how he kept going back to it. He's like, I mean, things are way more complicated than you guys think they are. And there was the one thing that he said that I really liked, where he's like, it's funny that people always go back to the olden days. Hold on. I like this quote so much. I'm going to be more, uh, every person has a story of their golden age, how it was different, better, more noble. It's funny how these golden ages are always in the past, always eclipsed by some more recent catastrophe. You think Dongbang was better 200 years ago, but go back 200 years, and I promise you the people then were just like us. They were angry, confused, afraid, and they thought that they'd already missed it. Some golden age that took place 200 years before them, or 500, or 1,000. He turned from the stars to look at Rook. Instead of worshiping the past, I'd like to work on the present. By murdering people? Some people need murdering. So like that is very true, like to my worldview, is that like people are always yearning for this like
Hmm.
golden past. So that's a
Yeah, that was
long-winded
good
way.
stuff. That's good stuff. And Talal, I think, does really land as a character who's like a thoughtful warrior type who hasn't given too much reflection to his place in
Yeah,
things, but a little bit. And so he's just like, I've just found myself here through circumstances, and there's, life is complicated. It's probably not the best thing that I'm always doing this, but maybe it's not the worst. Like, so yeah, I thought you're right. His character just, I think was really solid, and
yeah. So
some of those like nuanced philosophical points did come through for him, but he also didn't get like that much page
yeah.
time.
I will say, and this is just a theory, you can feel free to
Mhm.
disagree. Um, that you compare so much to other series you like doing something better, and I just don't do that. Like I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
like we're built on our experiences. Like there's no way I'm reading Empire's Blade without being influenced by the things I've read before. But I'm not consciously being like, oh, Brandon Sanderson did this arc better, Malazan did this political stuff better. Because then obviously I'd be like, this guy's like an amateur. But
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just like,
No,
oh,
yeah,
like this
totally.
this is an interesting idea. Like I like now that you say it, like yeah, it is simplistically depicted, but um I
like
guess
Ericsson's like the best, maybe the best ever
Yeah.
at doing this particular
Yeah.
thing in fantasy. So it's not fair to, bring up the best instances of everything and compare them to, I agree with you. But
Yeah.
and I like with reads that maybe are have simple aspects to them, but I was just more immersed and more engaged. Like The Faithful and the
That's your
Fallen.
main thing is immersion.
Like
I think
The Faithful and the Fallen, like just
Dude, don't
so immersed in those every
listen.
second of the
I'm gonna
way.
tilt you
And
right
like
now. I'm gonna tilt you right now. This book is better than all of Faithful and the Fallen.
See, I see people have negative things to say about them, and I just like you're saying, like I hear what you're saying, and they don't seem to be wrong, but that's just not my
Yeah, I get you.
experience. My
Yeah.
subjective experience reading it was just loving every second, being in suspense and tension every moment, and I wasn't comparing it to other things,
Yeah.
and was just in the moment with it. And so, yeah, a lot of my complaints with this do come from me turning on my more analytical brain to be
Right,
to like pick apart little plot holes or things I don't like that I wouldn't be doing with reads that I was just more engaged with throughout. So yeah,
For sure. And
I
we all do that.
totally feel you on
Like
that.
I just want to say, like, I pick on you because it's fun, but like I think you're an excellent reader and you're very well thought out. Here's the thing: is that I pick on people because they're my friends, but then I never respond with also saying nice things. So like I want everybody to know I think Ben is a valuable member of this community, but I also think that if one thing triggers his sense of realism out of it, if somebody holds a breath they didn't know they were holding, you better shut the front door. This book is awful.
No, you're right. You're right. I did. Staveley did have a moment where he did his own version of that, which I flagged just for fun. It wasn't too bad or anything, but I thought it was fun. Let's see if I can find it. But you're right there that I do really privilege just like full immersion and not ever being thrown out. Like I just particularly don't enjoy that. I like just for long stretches of time being fully in the book, immersed, visualizing everything, just being empathizing with the characters, being truly like inhabiting them. And so I don't like to be thrown out of that for even a moment.
I wonder if I don't feel that way because it's only ever happened to me twice. Like the only time for the longest time I ever had that happen to me where I just felt like I dropped into the world was A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
And for the longest time I was like, nothing's ever gonna do that again. And then Stormlight did that to me too. And that's why I was like, maybe I like Stormlight more. And then with a little bit of distance, I'm like, no, I don't. But those are the only two times where I was like I'm always being analytical. And that's why people think that I hate things, because I will love anything, but then point out 7 things in it that I think are dumb, and they're like, "Well, then, like, why did you give it 5 stars?" I'm like, "Cause like, it was a great book. I just like, I mean, this thing is dumb. Like, do we need? Okay, here's a dumb thing about The Empire's Ruin that I absolutely drove me crazy. That kid, Rat, learned English way too fast. Absolutely impossible. Absolutely impossible. And not only did it, so it got to the point where I just kept being like, "There's no way she would know this word." Like. She would say a word, and I'm like, okay, what context could Gwenna have stopped and taught her this word? Like, he did not think this through at all. He's like, I need this kid to say some things.
Yeah.
And he did not think through that. So, like, that kind of stuff bothers me. But it's because I'm so trained to be that way. Like, I'm never not that way. It doesn't impact my enjoyment. What normally impacts my enjoyment is, like, actual plot things that don't work for me, characters that don't work for me, prose that I think is clunky. Like, things that, like, actively detract versus me just being like, I mean, that's kind of dumb.
So here's here's the line. There was an ache inside of him worse than the bruising of his ribs or the throbbing in his temples. A horrible soreness, as though some crucial organ, one he hadn't even realized he possessed, had been crushed.
That's dumb.
Yeah. This prose little device that gets used by fantasy authors so much, I notice it every single time it gets used. And in The Expanse, which I enjoyed, that was the one prose thing. Every single Expanse book had multiple expressions like that, where we didn't know something was happening in the body. And that's just a personal thing. I will notice it and it takes me out and it bothers me. But this one was particularly.
Do you just not notice things that happen to your body? I mean, okay, that one's dumb. Like, fully dumb. But I remember on Discord one time, you were just having a day and you're like, I'm gonna fire some shots. And you were just like, he let out a breath he didn't know he's holding. You were like, nobody's ever felt that way. That's dumb. And like 6 of us were like, actually, sometimes I feel that way. And you're like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
dumb.
yeah. No, see, that is the thing. I think people often privilege their own experience, and
Right.
it's hard sometimes to really get outside yourself and imagine that other people do have experiences you don't have, physical ones, mental, thoughts and beliefs. And so that is one nice thing about being in this larger community, is that we can just get some of our preconceptions or our biases thrown back at us and be a little more
Yeah, I
reflective
love
about
that
things.
about
So
our community. This just reminded me, this has nothing to do with books, but just as an example, I met a dude one time at my work. He was like a regular at the bar. He swore up and down. He like to the whole time I knew him, he never had a headache in his life. He was like 60 years old.
oh, me
And I'm
neither.
like,
Yeah.
how have you never had a headache? You're lying to me. You don't know
No,
what a headache is.
I
You just,
don't.
that's insane. See,
Like
so
when people, I
like
imagine it's bad and that it's unpleasant, but I'm very lucky. Yeah.
that's
I don't.
crazy. So
Yeah.
that's one of those things where it's like, oh well, everybody has had a headache, and he's like, I've never had a headache. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Of course you have. I was like,
No, I
stop
haven't.
trying to be a man and admit that you've had a headache.
No,
That's
like,
wild, you know.
yeah, yeah, no, I've had that same experience. Very lucky, no doubt. But there were. Let me get into chapter one. So, chapter one, I know Staley came back and added this in to be, the Gwenna failing so intensely that it sent her into this horrible depression. But to not to keep my belief. How does it work? My suspense of disbelief.
Yeah,
My
suspension of disbelief continues.
to
I
keep
guess
my
I know what you
suspension
mean.
of
I know.
disbelief going, he failed to create a situation that made sense to me, because when they fail and she loses the bird and her flyer and didn't even rescue Talal, I guess she rescued Cora. There, Staveley himself digs his own plot hole here, because he basically tells you how valuable the special forces Ketrel are. He says, we'd flown that bird on scores of missions back and forth across the continents. One bird was a far cry from the several hundred, but even one was enough to turn certain tides, to alert commanders of impending attacks, to move the best generals to the fronts where they were most needed, to keep the Emperor herself informed of what was happening in all the far-flung corners of her crumbling realm. It was no exaggeration to claim that without the Dawn King, Anur might have lost cities, armies, even entire atropes. So they are the single most valuable asset, military or otherwise, maybe this empire owns. And they are supposed to be just embedded in this very dangerous city of Dambang. It has to be them that is inciting this seemingly doomed rebellion. Like it sounds like most of the Anurian supporters have already been rooted out, and that this city is firmly in the hands of the Dambang loyalists, who's most of the population. And Staveley has never convinced me that this swamp city is strategically important to the world, first of all, and that there's any reason why the one special forces Ketrel team has to be the one fomenting rebellion, which is doomed anyway. And so that the fact that they lose multiple of their members when other people in the army could have been doing this, and they could be going on their much more valuable missions or just staying safe. And then I just hate this. Cora is a prisoner, one of the special forces, one of the elite forces in the entire empire, and she is being marched by the enemy soldiers, and her hands are tied. She has no chance of escaping at this moment when her and Talal are being marched through the streets of Dambang. And we find Cora just cursing out the guards, just really trying to rile them up for no reason. The smart strategic thing would be to keep your mouth shut, see if you can figure out a way to escape, maybe even listen with your super spidey senses to see if there's a rescue coming. But instead, she's just cursing out her guards, and she almost gets killed because she's just running her mouth. It's not strategic running of her mouth.
Benghis, do you have a problem with tough women?
And so Staveley does this. He has them curse. Cora and then Gwenna too are just fleeing curses left and right to, I think, show that they're tough.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So look, Staveley just has things that just grate on me. And this is one of those things. First of all, excellent breakdown of that chapter. I agree with you entirely. I did not think of most of those things. I agree entirely. But Staveley's just need for Staveley's idea of toughness is just superficial. Like it's not what I think is tough. Brienne of Tarth is tough, but Sansa Stark is also tough. It's just a
Mhm.
different type of toughness, and I don't think he has that nuance, or if he does, he doesn't like to employ it. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. He just does this stuff all the time, where it's like people just have to be talking shit and like always just like on and like you guys can comment like everything to do with Jonan's lackeys was just
Oh
so
yeah,
unnuanced. And I was
yeah.
really
Oh,
hoping
brutal, brutal.
there was one part where I don't remember when it was, but I thought one because he had three hunky dory rapists on his team,
Yeah, yeah,
and I thought one of them was going to get redeemed a little because it's not like they were rapists. They were douchebags in training,
yeah.
and I thought one of them was going to become less of a douchebag. I think it was Chet, maybe I don't remember which one. And then no, he just doubles down, and they're just awful for the whole time. And look, awful people exist. I actually feel like I'm echoing Jake here on something that he had for Dandelion Dynasty, but I would like a different brand of awfulness every
Yeah,
once in a
yeah,
while.
yeah,
Like they just were so one note, and
yeah.
this was so movie style. Now that I'm into this, I'm thinking about dumb stuff, which is that like when the ship crashes and they break perfectly into their already alliance, this just drives me crazy. And then not only that, when they get attacked by this thing, we haven't even talked about the thing that they were attacking them. I
Yeah.
loved all that. I don't know how you felt. We'll talk about it in a second. When that thing was chasing them and picking them off one by one, and it was like a spider or
But
whatever.
of course, the terrible rapist wannabes, they all survive until the very end. Like everyone
Of
else,
course, that just drives me crazy.
yeah,
There's three of them. Keep one. Like when Jonan shows up and he's like, "All my troops died." He's been picking them off one by one, but all my rapists are accounted for. It's like, dude, can you just not do this? And then when they finally get attacked, they get attacked by like the main dude, like the thing, and there's like 9 of them left or whatever, and then they get attacked, and they naturally separate during the attack. And then Jonan and all his dudes are together, and then all of Gwenna's allies are together. I'm like, this is not what would happen. This is so stupid, and it's not a big deal, but it bothers me because it makes me think of the author. Like if I think of an
yeah,
author
yeah, yeah, yeah.
while I'm reading, I'm not thinking about the book. So you
Yeah,
need to
that's the suspension
disguise.
of disbelief. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I need to. So when you do that, I'm just like, oh, you want them to be away from each other for convenience so that these guys can get attacked and then your guys don't get attacked. But if a giant monster attacked, you're not going to be like, hey, okay, my friend is over there. My friend is over. We're going to all run to get, like, you're just going to flee.
yeah.
And whoever you were next to in that moment, that's what's going to happen. So it just drove me crazy that, like, he just does shit like that all the time.
And
And
lots of predictable plot points too. Like
yeah.
surprise of the century, we didn't see Talal being executed. He's a named character who gets a lot of page time in the first trilogy too. So
Oh, I didn't know
I
that. Okay, so that
so
was actually a surprise for me. I thought
like
I thought maybe
I
he could be alive, but
yeah.
I would have for
When
sure
he
if he
showed
was in
up
this
with
trilogy.
Ruck in the gladiatorial arena, I was like expecting that. Not a big surprise. Little other things like Jonin Lem Jonin, also dumb name Jonin Lem
His
Jonin.
names are terrible.
The ship captain, like him being the big villain in Gwenna's arc, to me also didn't land. Like he ends up
Oh, I
being the
liked it.
evil faux villain, and I guess he was influenced kind of in supernatural ways, like
Yeah,
to
like
kind of become a sociopath.
he was
But
fine
like,
the whole way along. I really liked him, but tell me your
okay,
problem. But I really liked him.
I can, but I don't know. It's just I never. He always felt like maybe a caricature to me. Like I never fully bought into him as like a real believable three-dimensional character, and maybe that was it. That it
Yeah,
just was
that's
a
fair.
little bit underwhelming that he was the boss at the end of Gwenna's journey of
I think
this.
it's just because it's a
Yeah,
book one that didn't like. I don't think he's. I think he was a good foe for that portion of the story, and I
yeah,
think the goal. So Gwenna's mental like arc is emotional and physical. So like the physical nature of her arc is echoing the emotional. Where when she is confined to the brig, she also doesn't want to leave, and then as she gets more and more like autonomy and like good feeling back, she also wants to like distance herself from Jonah, like she or Jonan. I keep saying Jonah, and she gets more invested in Rat, and she saves Paddock and Cholun, and she bonds with. So as she starts making more human connections, she also is being more involved in the storyline, which is directly contradicting with Jonan being like, I'm in charge here, and you are not doing the thing I want to do. Like if I think of it from a more metaphorical stance, which is funny because this guy speaks in metaphor. I like his placement in the story, and so him then becoming the final villain symbolically really worked for me,
Okay,
especially
yeah, I can
because
buy that. I can buy that.
he didn't turn evil. Like I
Yeah.
totally bought his choices the whole time, which is that, you know, he really cares for his men, and this thing is killing them, and he doesn't know what to do. He's a military man, so everything that's
Yeah.
happening with him his whole life, he always has a military, like a strict, like he was mad at Gwenna for not going along with the plan that he had set forth when they were being attacked by those pirates. But in this situation, he does not have that structure, so he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't believe in these grumpkins and snarks that are attacking them, and so he's just totally adrift. And the only thing he can know is that he wants to save his men, and so he drinks this water, and he just had no idea what this water was going to do to him. So the fact that he didn't just randomly turn evil, like
Yeah, yeah.
I
That's
thought
good. That's
really
good.
sold it
You're
to
right.
me.
That actually
Yeah,
does work. You're selling me on Jonin being the primary antagonist in that arc. So
yeah,
that's all well and good. What really harmed the end of Gwenna's arc for me, and I thought actually the arc relating to Rat was very touching, and that was
yeah.
maybe one of the best parts of the book for me.
I
And
agree.
how that ended with Rat being the one to kind of save her at the end and bring her back to herself. But I would have liked for her to have gotten the ring on sooner in that climactic scene. Like she's having what is really her emotional, like climactic moment where she's trying to work through like her depression or why, like how am I going to continue on and fighting through this? She's working through that while she's still under this kind of supernatural influence of this like sociopathic, like whatever the chemical is. And so the fact that she was like weirdly influenced during her kind of big emotional moment took away from that moment for me. I wish she was just more herself, having those thoughts kind of unimpeded with like the kind of sociopathic side coming in. But I did like how that ended though, with Rat kind of putting the ring back on, even if it felt a little predictable. Like it was satisfying. That
Yeah.
ending was satisfying.
We haven't talked about the Cess Stream guy, Keel.
Oh my
I
god.
really
Yeah.
I really liked him.
Yeah, you missed out on a lot of Keel in the first trilogy.
Really? Oh, so okay.
Yeah.
I mean, Bridget is not here anymore, but for, you know, posterity's sake, I was wrong. There's more than 3. I just, you know, I didn't know the rest of them were in there. Who else is from the original trilogy?
Okay, well, Keel is a pretty major character from the original trilogy. He becomes like a kind of Cestream sidekick to Adair, and you're not sure if he's good or bad for a while, but then he kind of proves himself as the good Cestream, and Ron Il Torja was the
Okay,
bad one.
real quick. I'm very glad, actually, in retro, I forgot about this. I'm really glad in retrospect he was from the original trilogy, because I figured out 500 pages before Gwenna
Oh
did
my
that this guy
god.
was Deathstream,
Yeah,
and I was
all
like,
the clues.
this is
All
the
the clues.
dumbest reveal of all
Yes.
time.
Oh my
But
god. No.
if
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
yeah,
It I thought when he was singing in 3 different notes at the same
no
time
doubt.
that Gwenna was gonna realize, but that wasn't enough. He was doing something
No.
clearly unhuman. It wasn't until a few pages later in the cave. I'm actually open to this page where uh, he said, "It did not happen the way you think." Gwenna started to respond, then pulled up short, her thoughts spinning. She turned slowly to stare at the historian. The truth was a cold blade sliding silently between her ribs. "You're one of them," she said. "You're Cestream." So we get a classic Staveley metaphor for that moment. The truth was a cold blade sliding silently between her ribs. What about the giant whacking on the head that he's a Cestream the entire book? Oh my god. Yeah,
I mean, I
that
think
was
the first,
brutal.
so the 3 tones, I was like, "Come on, Gwenna," but the first clue is that everybody's going crazy, and Keel's just like
Yeah, and
like, for
not
the
to
whole
mention
book, everybody's just getting crazy and crazy and crazier, and
she
Keel's just
has
like,
supernatural smelling abilities to smell
yeah,
emotions on people. She doesn't
right.
smell any emotion on him ever. That is not a clue. Oh my god, that
So
was
I'm really
one of
glad, at
the yeah.
least, so okay, so that makes a lot more sense to me, because I think Brian Staveley is unable, I think this would be hard for any author, not impossible, but hard, to set up a mystery within a book in a sequel series where the audience already knows, but like you can't have the characters know, because it needs to be revealed to the characters. I don't think he did a good job. Like, I mean, Gwenna should have figured it out way sooner. But that at least makes it better to me, that I could see why it was harder for him to gauge what the how predictable it would be, because he already knows a large portion of the audience is going to know that this guy is Sestrum. So that actually
Yeah.
makes that a little bit better for me.
So one of the interesting things about continuity from the original trilogy is I think finishing that actually did hurt my experience of this now that I'm thinking about it more because of the
For
way
sure.
character arcs played out. Because he spoke about this in the podcast that Valen kind of his arc got kind of just like taken over by Gwenna in the original trilogy,
Yeah.
and Gwenna became the main Kestrel character, and she ended up training new cadets and coming to really save the day for the Empire in the original trilogy. And her whole arc was compelling, and Valen was just kind of became this weird, like Daredevil type superhero in the shadows. He couldn't see, but he had supernatural Slarn senses and vision, and he became this weird Daredevil style warrior, just doing random stuff. And so Valen just fell by the wayside, and now he's just like been missing. Now we don't know what's going on with Valen. Caden, he ended up sacrificing himself.
Yeah.
And at the end, in some really weird plotting that wasn't very climactic, where he ended up sacrificing himself and going to be with the gods, and he ended up taking down, along with some others, Ranil Torja, the bad Sestream, who wanted to take over everything. But Adair, so Akil is basically replacing Caden's spot in this narrative of being the Shin monk kind of side of things in the character. But which was welcome, because I actually really liked Akil in the first book, and then in his POV story, The Last Abbot of Ashkelon, the short story, is my single favorite piece of the whole Staveley world. And so I was happy we got more Akil, but he just didn't give him that much to do in this. But Adair is really the central character of the last two books of the first trilogy. Like,
and Adair
is really her story.
My least favorite part of this book.
And she's a protagonist. Like, she's seen like overcoming the odds to sit the Unhewn Throne after mentioning that no woman can sit the Unhewn Throne. Like, she actually did with very little fanfare.
Women can't sit the Unhewn Throne.
Yeah, apparently they can very easily, actually,
okay.
Because there was barely
an inconvenience.
So she took the throne in very little fanfare, like in opposition, but she was like a compelling character actually in the last couple books of the trilogy, trying to figure out how to rule, how to who were allies. Ranil Torja was this weird Sestream ally who was also her villain, and so like she was the real central part. And now she's just been sidelined as this like weird, seemingly like villainy emperor character, where that just does not make much sense with where we left off. And so that is throwing me off a bit in this new trilogy, just like what is going on with Adair. But so that finishing the trilogy might have actually hurt my enjoyment a lot on this, because
I partially wonder, like, I think I think reading The Emperor's Blade before reading this was probably good for me, because it allowed me to just fill in the world building details that I already kind of knew about. But I think just seeing the things that repeat that like he's not good at really bothered me. And so I think if I had finished the trilogy, I would have had a much worse experience with this. I didn't even know about that would have bothered me too. But yeah, I don't know. I'm really glad that I didn't finish and I read this, because I unabashedly enjoyed this. And I think I wouldn't. I don't think I would have suddenly hated it, but it would have probably been like a 3 or 3.5 star if the things that already bother me now had been bothering me for 2 more large books. So
no, I think it helped you, which is good, because this is a big book, so it's great that it was a really solid read for you.
Storyline, I just okay. So I have multiple problems with Akil's storyline. They're not logic. They're just dislike.
Yeah.
The first is fire that audiobook narrator. Don't hire him back.
Oliver Cudbill, like he was so much worse. So much worse.
Severance. Like give him a letter of thank you.
Yes.
And never hire him again. I'm so sorry. But I hated you. Not good.
Oh my god.
So that made that worse. So I would actually always, like, after a while I got sick of it, so I would switch to physical reading only for Akil's chapters. So that put it on a bad thing. Second of all, I agree with you that Akil didn't get enough chapters based on the other ones, so it felt like it took so long. But then also I don't think so. Here's the thing: if you're having a character be a main character, it makes sense to give them, their own personal things to deal with and their own flaw. Like, if you think of A Song of Ice and Fire, I don't know, we're both reading it right now, that's why I keep coming back to it. Giving Davos and Theon some individual quirks and personal failures and like internal stuff, that all makes sense. So I don't think it shouldn't have happened with Akil. He was in a weird spot where he got too much for what he was, but he got like he didn't get enough for me to consider him a major character.
Yeah.
So if he had gotten 4 more chapters and we had just like fully embraced the length of this book, I feel like I would have been invested in his whole thing with like his saving his friend and how he feels like he was the sole person who made it out, and then he was the sole person who made it out of the monastery, and he's dealing with this old monk who's just like senile. Like that is the bare bones basis of a good character. And I think I would have really liked him. And if we had gotten less of him, if he was like interludes, if it was
Interludes,
treated
yeah.
if it was treated like Brandon Sanderson style, just embrace the way of kings.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally name referenced the way of kings in this book.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just do that. Just have him be like, 20 pages after every section, and just the bare bones. And then next book we learn, like, make him a full POV, and we learn all about, like, his backstory. Like, that would have, I think I liked it more. But the middle ground we got, I was just like, dude, I do not want to be reading about this guy. I don't care about him being fed to pigs. I don't care about him missing his friend. I just don't care.
And he's just essentially wanting to get money to like get drunk. Like,
yeah, like
he doesn't need to get rich to get drunk. Like, first of all, Staveley's overselling how much money he needs to get drunk every day in this world. He apparently needs to rob the emperor so he can have money to get drunk.
It's like that meme where it's like Pinky in the Brain. It's like, number 1, rob the emperor. Number 2, question mark. Number 3, get drunk.
Nothing about his storyline actually makes logical sense. So he eventually being forced to go through the Kenta and probably die unless he can find the Zen. What do they call it? The Vanyate, the emptiness.
Yeah.
Unless he can completely empty himself of all emotion and thought, he's gonna die. And that is the end game of this. Like, that's obvious that he's eventually going to be tested. And he put himself in the situation where he was probably going to die. He did it again, where he goes to the card game and he presses his luck with all the cheating, which I liked that scene. The card scene, the poker scene. That's one of the best card scenes I've experienced. But he took it too far, and it was obvious, I thought, where it was going. I just knew that the palace guards had followed him and were going to intervene if he was in danger. So like the fact that ended so predictably, put a damper on what was a cool tension-filled scene leading up to that. But so his actions just don't make a lot of logical sense, and I don't like that his arc was basically like, just get him into a contrived way to get the seed for the plot of the series, because there were like 20 Kenta gates. He just happens to find the right one after not much looking that has all these cassette stream weapons. And then the second time he goes back just happens to be the exact moment that the cassette stream woman died and was able to hand him the seed with her dying. That's one of the tropes in TV and movies, in books. That is one of my least favorite things.
Yeah,
when someone has just enough time to like give someone something, tell you, but not everything, but not every detail. And they die just before they can tell like the more important details about it. I hated that with a fiery passion, that he just so happened to have walked through that gate at the time that this woman was running through the room dying and was able to give him the seed. I despise that. It just reeked of author contrivance. And Staveley did it with the Dambang thing, getting to Lal and Dambang and like the Kestrel going on a mission that didn't make sense, and Akil being in that room to get the seed at that right time. Like, he does these author contrivances where other authors just probably just are better or spend more time figuring out how to make it make more sense. So it's less plot holy, so I can keep my suspension of disbelief.
You know what I think it is? Staveley, now that we're talking about it, I think like he just like treats his books like a movie. Like, when I'm comparing, like he just does a lot of movie logic where it's like, look, if I'm watching Fast and the Furious, literally every single scene of Fast and the Furious is stupid. Like there's not a scene in any of those movies where I'm like, well, this holds up. But you're just in it for the vibes and for the family and like all, and and that's just what I think he just treats it as like, if you think, because honestly, Gwyneth's storyline reminded me so much of the King Kong movie. And I'm sure if we had King Kong, the novelized version, we would have a lot of problems. Like, we would just be like, why are these people doing this? Why are they doing this? This guy's motivation doesn't make any sense. He just wants to, shoot a giant monkey. Like, so You can do all that. But because it's a movie, you don't pay attention. But in a book, you're like, okay, these thought patterns need to be thought more through. And I think Staveley just doesn't put in that work. Like, I think he's just like, this is cool. Like, the rule of cool
Yeah.
just rules him.
Yeah, I think so. And the character arcs to me just aren't that satisfying. It's like Rook has this cool inner conflict going on with the way he was raised, and it's like, does he let out the inner beast, or can he be this like saintly like priest of love? And that's a cool inner conflict. But where does it go? It's like at the end, he's just forced in the gladiator arena to just like, the lesson, his arc is just like, oh, fight. Like, I have to fight and we'll survive that way. Like that was not a satisfying arc for Rook, even if his character like conflict along the way was interesting. And a lot of the characters, they're all like similar ages, and they're all going through like similar like identity conflicts. Like, what is the meaning of my life? Who really am I? Am I this like useless, like just vain, selfish person, or is there something greater? Like, they all have a very similar style of arc and interpersonal conflict. So there wasn't a lot of variety with the POVs. Like with Song of Ice and Fire, like you're bouncing around these different POVs. The ages, the types of personalities, the inner conflicts are so different and varied.
Yeah. One thing that I just realized is that like all three of the protagonists are in their like mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Which I think that's partially a symptom of it being like a sequel series, but I'm really glad. Like, I mean, you're right. I could have used more variants in the POVs, but I am glad that none of them were teenagers, which like teenagers are fine. But man, I think that is my biggest, no, it's not my biggest issue. It is one of my biggest issues in Faithful and the Fallen is that Corbin is 14 in the first book, and then everybody mentions it all the time, and then people just forget for the rest of the series that he's 14. And then he's like 15, and he's doing crazy stuff. And that scene is the scene is awesome. But I'm like, but you guys know he's 15, right? Like, so that aspect of it, I do appreciate that he made all these people older, because mid to late 20-year-olds are just out of fashion in fantasy. It's like teenagers and then like middle-aged protagonists and like old people.
But I came to this at the wrong time. So the Space Between Worlds had such a similar like mid-20s main, only one POV going through personal identity crisis, got very depressed. Like, I was already maybe just soured on this type of character arc, and then we get three of them here, and then it did not help the book of Rubicon that I then read, that where it was like a similar main POV. So I am just tired out of these like 20-year-old like going through their quarter life crisis, figuring out their identity, where the author is just narrating every single emotion and thought that they're having in their inner life. I think that's more of a
modern fantasy thing. I think that's a stylistic choice that you don't like. And you were mentioning like Martin at the beginning, and it's like Martin is like an old school writer. He doesn't do that, but like a lot of more modern authors, they have that real close proximity.
Yeah.
And it actually, Jimmy, I don't know why I'm talking with my hands right here the whole time. Jimmy mentioned this in his like Grace of Kings review, I think, which I really agreed with, which is that a lot of people bounce off the Grace of Kings because it does not do that, and it's like a modern book. And I think a lot of people, I mean, now there's a lot of videos telling you like, it's a different thing. But like when people first started reading Grace of Kings last year, a lot of people were bouncing off of it because they just expected it to be more like other modern fantasy, where it's like right in people's perspectives, and it's just not. And that's just
I think you're right. It is much more pervasive with anything being released in the last 5 years. But stuff that does it a lot, like Sun Eater back here, I feel like that does it a lot too. You're very close in psychic distance wise with Hadrian, but there's just I'm just more engaged by the internal life, like just the actual substance of the thought and how it's framed, and the I feel like there's more sophisticated. I like it when it's sophisticated, and I feel like I'm gaining wisdom, or the actual conflicts aren't so repetitive. But like here, there's a lot of repetition of the internal thoughts and conflicts, and like I didn't need to be beaten so many times over the head with the same exact thing. And I think Sanderson's actually really good at this, of having long-term inner conflict that maybe is like the same type of inner conflict like for main characters over many books, but that it doesn't feel overly repetitive, like with the situations they're in, and with the actual like thoughts that they're having, and it doesn't feel like I'm just experiencing the same exact inner thought again and again. I know people sometimes feel that way with Kaladin, but I never felt that way. But I think Staveley is not as good at creating more of that variety of internal life?
Staveley's just a B- at most things, and an F. Here's the thing: he's a B- at most things, and an F at some things, and it just averages out to be annoying. But then I don't
Yeah.
know. This time it just like it's funny because I'm hating on this book now, but I my rating's not going to change. Like I really liked it, but man, he just does so many things. I just want to be in the room with him and be like, Brian, do we need another brutal task for people to do? Could we? How about the brutal task is everybody goes for a picnic and they say one nice thing about each other? How about that? Like I think so, you know, the fact that he's like a runner and he does these like long distance things,
yeah.
I'm like, of course he does. And he like the Way of Kings and the where they're like slapping him, that's from jujitsu. Like, I mean, it's not called the Way of Kings. I forget what it's called. It's like the walk of a something. I don't
Oh.
do jujitsu, but it is like a
Oh,
thing
that's
in
the thing.
jujitsu
Okay, I didn't.
where I mean that's a more brutalized version of it. But you walk like through people, and I don't know when it is. Like I don't know if it's when you get your black belts or when you're getting initiated. I don't know, but I do know that you walk through everybody and they slap you with their belts and stuff, and it's supposed to be like an atonement or like a getting great. Like I don't know exactly the process, but I do know that that's clearly where it's inspired from. And he just does that kind of stuff all the time. And then, but
Yeah.
he doesn't have characters that don't do that. Like I just have a dude that just, you know, is happy. Like I don't know how to put into words what it is because obviously like, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire doesn't have happy people. Like, but their thought processes are different
Mm-hmm.
and they're like
Yeah.
they're not always just dealing with trials. Thankfully there was no convoluted trials in this one. I was just eagle-eyed on convoluted trials. And
Yeah.
they weren't that. There were some
No.
trials, but the trials made sense. Like the one was like, you know, gladiator fighting. I'm like, all right, that's tried and true, you know. And then Gwenna had one too. I forget what it was. What was Gwenna's big
Oh,
thing?
I don't know. Her trial? I mean, uh, I don't remember when she was just on the ship. I mean, oh yeah, she did. She did have a trial. She was going through. She was being put beneath the ship so that she would go under the ship, and it was Jonan's way of trying to execute her through like a regular punishment that the Navy used, where they would tie her to a rope, and then the ship would like sail over them, and she would just be beaten on the bottom of the ship. But apparently, you can game that really easily because like it barely hurt her.
I feel like we need to do a pitch meeting for this series. Why did Akil show up right at the time when she was gonna die? So the book can happen. All right, then.
Gwenna's been a warrior, an elite warrior for years, and her specialty is demolitions. And she just happens to have lost one of the bombs off of her belt as she's going to the other ship, and that ended up causing the explosion and killing her own people and contributing more to her depression. Like the two big instances where Gwenna failed that contributed to her depression, I thought were so poorly contrived. I just forgot about the bomb thing until
Yeah,
now.
me too.
She just happened to have lost the bomb. Also, they just happened to have given bombs to the Dambang people that so that they could explode one in that first chapter. One of the many reasons I hated the first chapter. Oh my god.
Before I forget, this was something you said a long time ago, but I wanted to flag it. Your problem with chapter 1, kind of like I wouldn't call it a problem, but it relates very strongly to a nitpick I have from Fire and Blood, and I just want to see after you finish Fire and Blood, we're going to talk about it. I just want to flag it now so that we remember to talk about it later. But it reminded me specifically. I went into Discord and I was like, oh, here's a thing that I don't think Martin really thought through or like didn't put on page that well, and I posted it, and people were like, I've never thought about that, but you're kind of right. So we'll see.
Can we take a moment? I flagged all these. I just want to quickly go through if we're still good to stay on for a little while longer.
Yeah.
So on page 25, we're a while into the first chapter where the fire starts happening in the baths.
You mean a blaze?
So here we are, page 25. Even as she spoke, a blazing tangle of wreckage fell between her and the flyer, forcing her back. Okay, first time. I like it. I'm a fan. Then one page later, fire blazed all around her, but she felt ice cold as the green shirt seized the body of the fallen flyer. All right, maybe shouldn't have used it in the next page. give it maybe a page rest, because on the next page, 27, we get the door blazed, but they could make it. Could we not say burned just once here?
This is
And then
beautiful, Ben.
the next page, 28. Let's see. There were shapes outside beyond the fire, green shirts who had already escaped the blaze, people who would need killing when she came through. Do we give it a rest? No. Page 20, page 20, page 29. Page 29. Oh no. Did I mark these incorrectly?
Sorry, you killed me with can we give it a rest?
Oh no, I think I marked bile rose in the back of her throat. Okay, that one wasn't a blaze, that was a bile. And then the next one was grief was a jagged bone lodged in her throat. So did we need two of those metaphors on the same page? Let's see. A knife in the eye would be easier. Oh, see, there's her commenting on the metaphor again. So Staveley provided the metaphor. Grief was a jagged bone lodged in her throat. Anything would be better than this. A knife in the eye would be easier. A sword run through her gut would be easier. All right, so we did get a few page break, honestly, before the next blaze. 38, we got none of it felt real, not the sun on her face or the pain blazing in her shoulder. Like, I understand, he loves using it with fire, but do we just have to use it for things like pain also?
Ben,
and then
you know about undulate, right?
Oh yeah, that word doesn't bother me. And
okay, no, but this is gonna be your undulate. I'm gonna wait till you're a big.
It's not though, because I don't have a problem with any word used that's a little bit uncommon, just used sparingly. But undulate, people have a problem with it used once. Like, that's fine, use the word. But when it's like this, it's overkill. But this is my undulate for this book. Rook couldn't see the fish rising. The water was black, except where the flames glazed it. But according to the fishers, the red scales and ploutfish took the blazing basket for the moon. See, he loves the sound of blaze. He rhymed it with glaze there.
In there too, yeah. The poet and then coming out.
On page 148, all around him the monastery blazed. So this is Akil remembering the monastery burning. The next page, we get you always escape, they chanted, eyes blazing with fire and accusation. Like, come on, the next page. The next page. Bro. I didn't use the ebook. Like, I wasn't searching for it. I did it the old-fashioned way. I was just noticing it as I was reading. 163. The burning church, face streaked with sweat and blood, black hair soaked and glistening as though ablaze. So that was that Ruck and Bien in the burning church? There's so many fires in this book. All right, and then we go to 168. When it was over, he stood beside Bien, staring into the blaze. Like, would it kill you? Would it kill you, Staveley, to just say fire? Would it kill you? Just say fire. All right, the next page, page 169. That's why he was there, tending the fire, while the others lay unmade inside the wreckage left by the blaze. Okay, he said fire in that sentence. Just come up with a different way of saying it. Just don't repeat that word on the next page. All right, and then on page 272, are we with Adair? We're with Adair and Akil. She leaned toward him, eyes ablaze. So there we have another eyes ablaze. That's one of his favorite things with the Malkinians. They have those special glowing eyes. Then there was a long break. We got at least I didn't notice it. We got a long, nice chunk, thankfully, with no blaze. Until I was like, maybe he stopped. Maybe it's over. But then 624, she retreated a step, blades raised, blood blazing in her veins. Like, do we need that? Do we need the blood blazing in the veins? There must be another word.
I just want to make a short. I'm going to make a short. You should make a short. You should go back afterwards and make a short of you just reading all these blazes and your little commentary afterwards.
I should. That's a good idea. That should be my first ever short.
Yeah.
Page 626. Let's see. That fire blazed at the touch, flared into perfect, excruciating pain. There we go. There's another one. And then near the end, there was also a blessed kind of a break from it until right towards the end. Right towards the end, he couldn't help himself. Page 728.
Get in one last singer.
Pain blazed like a beacon. But it wasn't the end. We're only like 5 pages from the end. Second to last page of the book, we have the memory was a hot stone in her throat, choking her. Oh, we get a double here. We get something in the throat choking right before. So there we go. The memory was a hot stone in her throat, choking her. She rolled to the side, ignoring the lacerating rocks, ignoring the blaze in her ribs, and vomited over the stone. So I'm trying to have a catharsis here, and we're on the second to last page, and I'm thrown out with one of those stupid throat stone metaphors and another blaze. We get a twofer right there.
Oh, Ben.
So, yeah. So
I have to admit, when you pulled out all those tabs and you were like, I'm gonna talk about all the blaze, I was like, I don't know if we need to hear every instance of blaze, but that was premium content right there. You're
yeah,
no,
that's Brian Staveley's. Like, this is why I feel like he needs a better editor. This is the type of stuff that a better editor, I think,
I agree,
would hopefully catch. Or maybe an editor is flagging some of these and he's just making the executive decision like, no, I like the sound of this word.
That's
I'm going
true,
for
because
it.
in A Dance with Dragons, George R. R. Martin says words are wins like an absurd amount of times. And somebody's actually told me, I think it's like 14 times, which is already too many, but it feels like way more. And apparently, like, his editor has actually said, she was like, can we please cut a couple instances of this words are win? And George was like, no, I like it. So maybe Blaze is his thing.
I doubt that the editor was editing on that level, because they apparently told him to go back to the drawing board and rewrite this whole thing. And so they got a second draft of it. I doubt that they invested.
They probably actually
so much,
edited it pretty poorly, because they were like, we got to get it out. Like, it's we had to write a whole new book.
Yeah. So I think this probably did not get great editing, most likely.
Probably. Maybe the second one will get better then. Maybe better editing in the second one. All right, Ben, I do have to get going soon, so let's wrap up here. Before we go, what do you think your expectations are for the second book, or like what's going to happen? Like, what would you like to see happen? Anything, and then any other last closing comments that you didn't get to?
Oh my goodness, that's tough. I have not thought about that much beyond the end of this book. I don't think he's clearly set up much of anything. Like, there's this looming threat of the evil Nevarim coming back with the weird messengers and the weird throat things, and they're attacking. And so I guess they've gotten some new Ketrel eggs, so they're going to reform the Ketrel, and they're going to try to build up an army and go to fight against the forces of the Nevarim. And I have no clue what the deal is with Akil and the seed and all of that, but that's as much as I can see for what's going to come.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't play these games. Like, I ask, I just don't. Like, I also have not thought about it. I do think like the Kestrum and the Nevala, I don't even know how to say the second one. The
Nevarim, I think.
Nevarim, yeah. I do think, like, obviously that's going to come to a head. I don't know if I want this to happen. I probably don't, but I think Caden is going to come back at some point in the second or third book, because he's just disappeared. And I just
no, but you mean Valen. You mean Valen. Caden went up into the sky. He died.
Oh, okay, Valen. Yeah, sorry. I meant
Valen.
Valen.
Yeah. The blind warrior hermit now. Valen.
Yeah. I think he's gonna come back.
Oh, that's a good prediction. Yeah.
I think Gwenna is gonna end up not on the side of Adair. That's my prediction. But that's hard for me to know, because like, you know more about Adair than I do. And I think, like, I didn't like Adair at all in this book, and I didn't like Adair at all in the first book. And so apparently I missed the best Adair stuff.
No, you missed more substantial Adair stuff, but not necessarily things that made her character look better. Like, she was just a pawn throughout the trilogy, and like really had a hard time establishing herself and her autonomy, and just did not have much agency, was not very sympathetic, but a little bit, like, a very weak character overall from the first trilogy.
Okay, well, Gwenna was better.
Yeah. Well, with Gwenna moving on from the Depression arc, though, I don't see.
So here's the thing:
what
if Gwenna is not? This drives me. So it's fine. I'm on the complete. Maybe you agree with me here. I don't know. Full disclosure for anybody listening: I have been depressed before. And it's not like it's a recurring thing. Like, you don't just take a pill, or like, a happiness vibe, and you're just like, I'm cured. And this really drives some people crazy in Kaladin's arc, but it drives me crazy when people complain about it. Like, it's one thing to be like, oh, like, I wish like we didn't focus on it as much, in Kaladin's arc, like that would be fair. But
Mhm.
when people are like, oh, like he's still depressed, I'm like,
Yeah,
bro,
yeah.
that's how depression works. So that's kind of how I feel about Gwenna. If Gwenna is just magically not depressed in book 2, I will have major problems with that.
But
If
see, she
we
got magically
focus,
depressed though in the beginning. Like she wasn't depressed in
but
the first trilogy at all.
so first of all, depression can have, quick onset. That's number one. But second of all, I think it's more that she has like PTSD combined with
Yeah,
depression.
yeah.
And like, that goes into the whole like broken man, broken woman thing of soldiers and stuff like that. But again, that's my point. If she's just magically better, I would have a huge problem with it. If she still has some problems, but is like kind of better, like we're not focusing on it as much. But sometimes she's still like, am I a good leader? Like, like I don't know if I want to do, like, still shows like the self-doubt and like the just like the underlying tones of depression. I think that will be fine. Like, I don't think we need to focus on it again for another book. But
Oh, I agree. I agree completely. And I think Ruck is going to join the Kestrel with Talal. Also, how dumb is it that they use the same word for the animal, the
dude, it's
bird,
so
Kestrel,
stupid.
the
And
people, the people who are part of the Kestrel forces, and the organization
I know
is
it
the
is
Kestrel.
absurd. It is absurd.
But
I
think
didn't
Ruck and Bien are
put that
going to
against this
become.
book.
They're going to escape with Talal and meet up eventually with Gwenna, and then they're gonna all work together somehow.
That's a good guess. Also, I forgot to mention, Ruck's last chapter ends in an extremely weird place. I almost wonder if he wrote the next chapter and somebody convinced him to push it to the next book. It is a really weird.
Wait, did it end where they escaped that arena?
But they didn't even finish escaping. He was like to Goatface. He was like, "Hey, Goatface, you can come with us. You don't have to stay." And then Goatface is like, "This is all there is." And then that's literally the end. I was like, "Okay, so
yeah,
presumably,
right.
presumably Goatface is gonna die. Like we're gonna start the second book with Goatface having sacrificed
he stayed
himself.
back.
Yeah. But we didn't actually get to staying. He was like mid sentence. He was like, "This is all there is fighting," and then just end scene. And I'm like, "What? Give us a few more paragraphs or something."
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled though that it overall worked much better for you this time than other Staveley books.
Listen,
but I wish I were there with you. That chapter 1 killed me though. That put me behind the 8 ball with enjoying the rest of the book.
Yeah. I had to tell a couple people that I knew wouldn't like say anything on Discord because I was hyped. There was literally times where I was like when Gwenna was fighting the Ketrel, I was like, I was just into it. And I was like texting like Alex and Jordan and Bookboard and stuff, being like, "This book's so good, I can't believe it."
Oh wow, wow!
Yeah. And so I was getting it out that way. That's why I can keep such a good face on Discord, because I was just like, okay, I've gotten out my gushing, but
I think I actually did hide the fact that I wasn't having a bad time with it. I was engaged. I read it really quickly. I read and listened to it over the course of just a few days. So
yeah,
I really did get immersed in large chunks of it, but it was just that weird mid kind of read for me where I was like, I'm thrown out of it every so often and noticing things that were nitpicks and just my investment was just like barely there, but it was there. So I did like it overall. It was 3-star read.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you're going to continue. For the next book, whenever it comes out, we can buddy read it. We don't have to do this like, secret time this time. Yeah. I think this was an exclusive because, we both were hating, but I think next time we can do a regular buddy read.
Yeah.
And if you want, we can discuss it or just discuss anything. I really like talking to you, Ben. I think you have a good perspective and I give you such a hard time because you're so funny. You are one of the funniest people on this platform. And I'm just glad to know you. And I'm glad that you hate stuff. And keep blazing, my friend. All right. Bye, everybody.
All right. See you later.